Okay guys, it's the final lecture and we're going to start by looking at a website called OpenSecrets.org. Basically our focus is going to be on money and politics, and OpenSecrets.org has this great presentation of 10 things every voter should know about money and politics, so I'll be quick and short with it. First maxim is money follows power. And if you look at this chart, you do see the basics that whichever party is controlling Congress tends to have more or at least equal funding from PACs. And as the Republicans controlled, they rose. Here you actually had a little bit of difference with the Republicans continued control when they were split control. And then as the Democrats took control, they rose in the amount of PAC money they got. So this is just the idea, once again, of the incumbency advantage, and also that whoever is in charge, whichever party's in charge, tends to get more money from PACs because they have the more ability to be able to influence legislation. As I mentioned before, incumbents almost always win, and once again you see re-election rates of incumbents in the House and in the Senate in green. And not only do incumbents win, but they usually win by huge margins. And you see massive spending imbalance too, in terms of how much money is being spent on incumbents versus challengers. All of this shows that more than 50% or more than half had a 10-to-1 spending imbalance over their challengers. And this just shows that over time it's become more and more expensive to be able to beat a House incumbent on average. The next is that small donors make good press, but big donors get you reelected. And at least this shows that 48% of sources to congressional candidates were from large donors. So yes, there are small donors that exist, but PACs and large donors are the ones who are dominating. The next is that the interests that are behind the money are predictable. In short, it's finance, insurance, real estate, labor unions, health. These are the ones that are giving the most amount of money. The next is that donors seek long-term relationships. Basically, last-minute donations don't work, as well as constantly giving election after election cycle. The next is that fundraising never stops. Basically, as soon as one election ends, the next is going to begin. And there's constantly fundraising going on Capitol Hill. As we discussed in class, the FEC, which is a 6-member body, is pretty inefficient and is incapable of really overseeing not only presidential elections, but also the Senate and House election. And although I don't necessarily agree completely with the idea, all hell broke loose in the 2010 elections, we did see outside groups with super PACs, because of the Citizens United case, spending $300 million on the 2010 midterm election. And the last one, although I don't once again completely agree with it, is that you don't have to be a crook, you just have to be human. But the point that they make is that every year the lobbyists actually rate the people who got done what they wanted to get done, and that is going to determine how they give money usually in the next year. Okay, so as discussed before, the cost of winning an election, both in the House and the Senate, has gone up over time. And we've also seen a growth in PACs since they were formed. This was a new thing after the 1974 amendments to the campaign finance reform bills. When we think about campaign funds, who's getting them? Once again, individuals are contributing, PACs are contributing. They're contributing to both the Republicans and the Democrats. This is just looking at 2001 to 2002 by party. At this point in time, the Democrats were in control in the House and Senate, so they're obviously getting more money. But you see that both individuals and PACs are contributing, but incumbents are getting far more money. And just kind of a reminder and an overview of kind of who can give. As an individual, so I can give $2,500 to a candidate. I can now give $30,800 to a national party committee per calendar year. And then there's also money that I can give to a state or district, to other political committees, and then there are kind of other limits that exist. So this is the way it works. PACs are also limited in how much money they can give. $5,000, $15,000, $5,000 the state. So there are limitations upon what both individuals and PACs can give directly to candidates as well as to parties. As I talked about before, this is not something new. We go all the way back to the Progressive era, and this is where we see some of the first limitations upon campaign finance. We saw attempts to limit corporate donations, then labor unions when we get to the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947. Unfortunately, most of these attempts were pretty ineffective because there was no enforcement mechanism. Really, when we get down to it, once again, it's important to understand the Federal Election Campaign Act in 71, and particularly the amendments that were added in 1974. So the idea that you have to disclose where money's coming from, but really the Federal Election Campaign Act amendments created the FEC, they created the concept of PACs, and they also put limitations upon individual contributions. The way that they got around the Federal Election Campaign Act amendments, though, was through soft money. Soft money is money given directly to a party. So in 2002, John McCain and Russ Feingold, senator from Wisconsin, senator from Arizona, came together and they signed the Bipartisan Campaign Finance Reform Act. This attempted to limit soft money donations of individuals as well as ban donations from corporations to national parties. It also banned the use of corporate or labor money for electioneering communication, which identifies candidates on a commercial within 60 days of a general election or 30 days of a primary. And as I said before, there were still ways to get around this. And the one way they found to get around this was through 527 organizations, which allowed them to be able to spend money on politics so long as, or at least running advertisements, so long as they don't coordinate with a candidate or lobby directly for that person. So they couldn't use the words vote for or vote against a particular candidate. They also got around it through 501c groups, which 501c groups are just nonprofit status. But 501c groups are limited in the amount of money they can spend, and they can't speak directly about candidates. But they can run issue ads. That did have an effect, and you can give unlimited donations to nonprofit organizations. Well, a lot of this changed with the Citizens United case versus FEC in 2010, which we've read a lot about. The biggest change is that the court ruled that limitations upon corporate donations to PACs for electioneering communication was unconstitutional. So, corporate companies could give money directly to PACs as much money as they wanted to, as well as create these advertisements. So, with this, you saw the rise in these super PACs, which these are the ones who in the 2010 election and 2012 election spent hundreds of millions of dollars running their own advertising as long as they didn't coordinate directly with the campaign. And a lot of people pointed this out as saying this puts way too much power in the hands of corporations. So these are some of the problems with campaign finance laws as they exist. Independent expenditures, okay? They can spend as much money as they want on advertising now through the Citizens United case as long as they don't coordinate with the campaign. Soft money, unlimited amounts of money can be given to a political party as long as a candidate is not named. And then there's also the problem of campaign financing when it comes to free speech. Buckley v. Vallejo originally upheld limits on campaign contributions, but established that donations to campaigns is a protected form of free speech. And the Citizens United case upheld that as well. Then you have the issue of just, does money buy elections? Well, there's mixed bag on this, but generally, most presidential elections, you can't really find a direct correlation between who raised the most money and who wins the election. Maybe you can find that, but there's also many other reasons that affect the way people vote. And particularly when we look at political party affiliation, the economy, and character, these are the reasons why most people tend to vote for who they vote for president. Now, in congressional elections, it is far more important that you raise money, but there's also the incumbency advantage, and as we talked about before, it's hard to prove that it's money and money alone that causes the candidate to win. Political scientists all the time are trying to find what is the reason for winning elections, and one thing a lot of people say it's the economy, and this kind of shows a chart about 50% or more of the votes that all these people won up here, and how closely it relates to a percentage change in real disposable income per capita in an election year. There's obviously some correlation here as you look at the dots along with the rise, but it's not directly correlated. Nate Silver is a political scientist who recently looked at a whole bunch of different reasons. He also looked at real disposable income per growth rate, and this is a more recent chart of who wins the election and what's the real disposable income per capita. And he basically also ran statistical analysis on a bunch of different issues, whether it is change in non-farm payrolls, change in unemployment rate, real personal income, excluding transfers, manufacturing index, and tried to find the things that had the most correlation. Real GDP per capita definitely has, as well as real gross domestic product. All these things do impact who wins elections, but there's really none of them make all of the difference. There are political scientists like V.O. Key who basically say retrospective voting. Voters who switch parties do so in their own interests. They're retrospective voting. They're focused on the economy. They're focused on their own wallet. So prospective voting is looking forward. Retrospective is looking backwards. And V.O. Key argues that retrospective voting is practiced by most voters and decides most elections. Okay, so let's get back on interest groups for the last few minutes and just go over a few quick things. Okay, an interest group is anyone who seeks to influence policy. Okay, and since there are many types of cleavages in the country, that means there's many different types of interests. And cleavage just means different groups, different belief systems that exist. And the Constitution provides many access points to government, right? You can talk to a member of court, that's the way interest groups can work, or Congress, or an executive branch. And also, since political parties tend to be much weaker in the United States compared to Europe, interest groups can work directly on individuals. Okay? And this leads to, in large part, pluralism, which is a belief that there's so many groups that no one group becomes too powerful. So why do people join interest groups? Well, there's really three reasons. The first is solidary incentives. People join because they want to be part of a group. Second is material incentives. They join because they can get something, like a free cup of coffee or discounts. And the third is purposive incentives, which is basically the idea that they like the purpose or goal of an organization. So for example, something like the NRA might be a reason that someone will join with purposive incentives. They believe in the purpose of it. Or maybe they like going hunting with people, and so they join it for solidary incentives. Or maybe it gives them some sort of discount at a local store. And different interest groups use different ways to try to recruit members. Also, when we think about interest groups, it's also important to notice that social movements is often part of this as well. Unions, for example, use social movements for a long time. After some of that activism died down, though, they tend to use material incentives often to recruit members, but union membership in general has begun to die. Okay, so here's one problem with interest groups, and this is a problem, once again, with money. Those who are more fluent are more likely to join and be active. Okay? And business and professional groups are more numerous and they're better financed than those representing minorities, consumers, and the disadvantaged. So often many people will claim that the most powerful interest groups are often the ones that are controlled or funded by the most powerful people. But there are definitely limits on elite influence within the system. I mean, often you have two companies that are competing against each other. Or many interests that are competing against each other, and that in itself is going to create a competition of interest and limit them. Also, many congressional staffers tend to think that those who actually have voting constituencies behind them, not necessarily those who have the most money, actually are the ones who wield the most power. So what do interest groups do? Well, here's a quick overview. The most important thing interest groups do is they provide credible information. Credible information because they are policy specialists, whereas congressmen are usually policy generalists. They can provide insider strategy on how to win elections as well as how to get legislation passed. They can mobilize the public through grassroots mobilization. They can also try to get undecided and legislators and their bureaucrats to kind of support their issues. They often do this through iron triangles. They can lobby through the courts through amicus curiae briefs, which we've discussed in class, but it's the idea of trying to get their view passed before court, like the Supreme Court, or they can provide donations through PACs, which you guys should be familiar with, which these were created through the 1973 and 74 changes, and it's a way to spend money on candidates. I'm about to run out of time, but I just want to point out that there's no systematic evidence that PACs actually influence votes in Congress. Read the rest of the slides. Good luck on the test. Peace out.